All right, welcome to This Week on Estimize. My name is Leigh Drogan. I'm the founder and CEO. Here again with Joe McCann, founder of Slingshot Insights. We're going to try something new this week. We're going to get the video going, a little bit screen share here. I'm going to let Joe introduce himself here, and we're going to get to a whole bunch of different stuff. But take it away.
Leigh, thanks for having me on again. I wish I had known it was going to be a video. Could have dressed up. At least the beard was trimmed. Yeah, great to be on. This is maybe the fourth time we've done this now. I'm with Slingshot Insights. We're actually going to be live next week and starting to host calls. We're crowdfunded expert network calls. We help our investors and our customers interview doctors and subject matter experts to better understand what's actually going on at the companies they're investing in. We look to try and provide as many primary sources and fundamental diligence products to people as possible. And the way that we make it affordable is we group up as many people from all over the investing world together and split the cost. So you get 80, 90, 95% off these really high cost, high value interviews. And everybody can make their own decisions on whether they like the stock or they don't like the stock, or whether what the guy said made sense or didn't on their own. But, we improve the inputs in the decision-making process, hopefully.
So Joe was analyst at CR Intrinsic on the Biotech side for 4 years.
Which is part of the SAC family, which is now 0.72, and that whole world.
So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different things today. We're going to get the screen share going in a second for some charts. But we're going to go through, there's obviously this big conversation about drug pricing taking place, not least of which has happened on Twitter with some presidential candidates. We're going to go through the Martin Shkreli story, which is, if it wasn't already interesting, getting more interesting.
The funny story, he was the first dollar our company ever made. It was Martin Shkreli. So I have not met him in person, but I have maybe a weekness for him a little bit.
There you go. And then we're going to go through some stocks that you like and don't like in the biotech space for 2016. All right, so let's just kick it off here before we get to the charts. Drug pricing. So before we got on, we talked a little bit about how, obviously some of the fear around whether there's going to be regulatory action taking place in this sector is now baked into some of these names. Which ones do you think it is severely baked into already that maybe don't really have the risk that the market is saying, there is, and people are being too pessimistic? Right. And what are the ones that maybe really do have the risk here?
Yeah. So, I think that obviously the big name out there is Valiant. I think those guys have traditionally raised price after they acquire a lot of assets. They've done maybe 100 acquisitions since 2008. There's a lot going. We can get into the actual specifics around Valiant over the last 4 months. It all started, though, around drug pricing and then kind of snowballed from there, and people piled into maybe some more issues. But yeah, I think fundamentally, the names that have bought drugs and then raised the price, like Mallinckrodt now owns them, but it was Questcor before that. MNK. You've seen that stock take a real beating on a lot of different fronts. But what is always like the common theme around this is that it's a drug that's been out forever, or at least a long period of time. Somebody new buys it, or somebody new starts thinking about it and raises it some percentage that doesn't even make sense, like 4,200% or something like that overnight. And the argument is always, why? Like, we haven't provided any innovation to the system. The counter argument, which is also not really understood enough by people, is that a lot of times these drugs are neglected because you can't make any money on them. And so they are really valuable, but A, there's no effort being put into making them better. And B, supply chain constraints have really not been very good, or supply have not been strong. So if you look back at the drug shortages, let's say in 2009, 2010, that list from the FDA, basically they went in and they said, you're not making this appropriately, you can't ship this anymore, it's dangerous. That list was really long. And there was a lot of life-saving medicines on there that were just gone or costing a ton of money in these gray market situations because they weren't being provided. Now, that's a really nice way to think about this. Like, great, you guys are going to come in and save the day, but you're also going to make like $50 million a year on this drug. Probably a middle ground on it. But the argument of the guys that are doing this is, hey, it's legal, B, you are going to get better outcomes as a patient because we are going to be paying attention to it now. And C, like whether we like it or not, like in a capitalist society, when you see a big revenue pool starting to exist, innovators, whether it's the company marketing it or not, is going to come in.
Yeah. So let's just talk about it in a world in which we don't have a single payer, insurance system.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a capitalist society. What regulatory means does the government actually have outside of negotiating as a single payer system against the drug companies to actually regulate the price for any given drug?
Right. I mean, this all goes back to the Medicare Modernization Act of 2003, where they basically bought off the pharma companies by saying you're not going to get a single payer negotiator. And it's not even a single payer.
Yeah.
Like, you have this one big government guy that's going to do so much. So legally, they're prohibited from negotiating on price. What they can do...
Why? Wait, let's just step back a second. For somebody like me who's ignorant to this kind of stuff, how did the government sell that down the road, like down the river? That's crazy.
What they said was, it's like this whole soundbite world, right? Where they didn't really get into that part. They said, we're going to provide prescription drug care for anyone over 65. And everyone says, oh, wow, that's really nice. Now, that all goes back to like Bush and Rove thinking that they lost Florida or was really close in Florida and they want to pay off seniors for 04. Sure. So let's go give them all prescription drugs. Oh, now they'll elect us. And he did. He won, changed the margin in Florida by a lot in 04. Right. So that worked, but that's where we are. Now, they tried to do prescription drugs actually under Clinton, I think, but they didn't have that provision in. And the pharmaceutical companies like blew it up, and Hillary's whole plan blew up because they come in, they say, well, wait a second. You guys are the only ones who buy drugs for a wide majority of indications because they're only for people over 65. So you can't come in. Like, what are we going to say?
Won't they just say, look, we're not developing this drug because it's not going to be cost effective unless you pay enough to develop the drug.
Right. It's all the long-term game, right? So in the long term, that would be the problem. I mean, we can get into like Bernie Sanders tweets on this, I think, are very rudimentary around like, well, why don't we just import them from Canada? Like, okay, well, in the long term, these guys aren't stupid. They're going to realize that the Canada price has to go up, and they're going to end up hurting access to Canada. But all these things are like really tricky and really high regulation. So it makes it really tough. The truth of the matter is that these guys don't really have much of a thing they can do. Now, I think personally for Valiant, the biggest concern is going to be that they look kind of shady now, and a lot of their drugs aren't need to have, right? There are other alternatives. Like if you are on one of the acne medicines that they make, there's 19 other options. Now, maybe you're like the 1 in 100,000 person that failed all those options, but most people don't need it, right? So a lot of it is like, okay, like we'll make a deal with you. Now, if you've really gone in and like violated those relationships, that deal might get a lot uglier. And so I think that they might have a problem over the next like 2 years as a brand repricing all their formulary positions.
Right.
That's the real risk for Valiant and a company like that. Not that the government's going to be able to come in and say this. I mean, like, if you look at the way the legislature is in the United States right now, like you're not getting meaningful legislation written and passed easily, no matter what, basically, right? Because Hillary can tweet out whatever she wants, Bernie Sanders can say whatever he wants, but fundamentally we can't get like the most basic gun law passed because Republicans just say no, right? So they're not going to come in and say, oh, you're right, we're going to do this incredibly complex, a million externalities, like we have no idea really what we're doing. There's a million lobbyists against it on drug pricing. It's just not going to happen. So it's all headline risk. It's all whatever risk, in my opinion. And these names that are doing this, is it the best ethical? Is it the best whatever? I don't know. It's a debate. Maybe because if like Turig Pharma and Shkreli really do put the money back into R&D and get a much better treatment, then yeah. Sure. But it's traditionally not totally the way it's gone. And if you look at companies like Endo and Valiant and all these names that are really more pricing and distribution companies rather than R&D companies, I think there's a decoupling of the two that's happening in the industry that I think is logical, to be honest. Like, why do you need to dismantle the marketing and distribution of a company every time the patents run out? Why and why do they need to be the ones that are picking what R&D projects to use? Why not just sell it into those companies? So I think you can have a whole structural conversation around, does it make sense to have Pfizer as the best distributor of drugs that gets them in the hands of everyone quickly versus 97 different biotechs that are trying to cure a disease and the winner will get purchased or into the Pfizer family? I think that's the conversation that Valiant's trying to have very poorly right now in the world.
So you think that this is all about headline risk and that the actual regulatory risk is relatively minimal. So what are the names that you think have been way too unfair? Or let me rephrase it. As a trader, what are the names where you think the multiple has been beaten down so much? The headline risk is too heavily weighing on the name, and that eventually the fundamentals will snap back to being the driver and stock will appreciate again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Gilead is a really good example of that. If you look at the way they've traded for the year, and I still read these odd stories about how the government's going to start negotiating on price and things like that. And like, they're generating an unbelievable amount of cash every quarter.
Yeah.
And they can do anything with it. I mean, they can buy back shares. They have a good dividend. They can buy anybody for the next leg. Management's proven that they're great acquirers. I mean, everyone thought they overpaid for the HCV franchise, and I mean, they've paid themselves back like twice over already, and it's just beginning. I mean, there's so many more people that they will cure with that. So I think they've shown that they're not, like too risky or too eager to spend the money. I think they've been really disciplined from a shareholder perspective. They've done a great job of buying franchises and owning that franchise rather than, trying to have 7 different businesses all of a sudden. And, they've proven they're not afraid to cure. They've proven they're not afraid to really, go into markets that people might not have thought were logical before. I mean, what they did in HIV, decades ago is still like one of the most revered things for that patient population. I mean, they made some huge commitments. So, and they've cured HCV, which is something that, the conspiracy theory people would say that pharmaceutical companies would never do, right? They're never going to cure something. They want to get you dependent, stuff like that. So I think they've shown that they're pretty shareholder friendly, pretty smart, and the stock's gone sideways despite the fact that they've just put a ton of cash on the balance sheet. And I think a lot of that's headline risk around what's the government going to do about an $80,000 price drug? Like, what's this? All these types of questions that I think are pretty erroneous when you look at the fundamentals of the business.
The price to sales multiple for Gilead has come down quite a bit over the last over the last 6 months. I just want to look up the price to earnings forward 1 year, and we're seeing
I think the
decent pullback there as well.
I think that getting a launch going in Europe takes a little bit of time, and obviously a high price item is tough, but you're seeing a ramp there. There's a lot of people with HCV in Europe that want to get cured.
Yeah.
I think those governments, at least in theory, should have a better understanding of the holistic price. You're saving in total outlay for the patient life because of the cure. So, if anybody, that's one of the arguments in the U.S. about why we don't get good outcomes. So you should be seeing an understanding and acceptance of that long term, because they are the long term payer, right? So the NPV should matter. And then, they're doing some smart deals to make a little bit of money off of the 180 million people in the developing world that need cures.
Now, what about
in India and stuff like that? What
about RTRX?
So I think RTRX is a little bit more complicated. They are the traditional buy a new drug and raise the price. Mm-hmm. I like them because I think their pipeline is actually really interesting. I think they have 2 drugs that are pretty cool and pretty interesting. We did an expert call, one of the first ones our company did with this drug RE024. It's still got a long way before it's on the market, but those are the types of assets that will provide a lot of value to the patients and will justify high prices. In the meantime, the founder, Martin Shkreli, which kind of started this whole fight, which is part of why they're in it. He doesn't work there anymore, but he's been in the news a lot. Again, we can get into that later. But they bought a couple assets that were really severely underpriced. If there's 2 treatments out there for a disease, one's $90,000 a year, one's $12 or $1,200, let's say, and then you bring that in line with the other drug. The way our system works is that it takes a little bit of time for a generic to come out and say, okay, now it's like basically free again. But in the meantime, you can make a lot of money. And, they're doing a lot of things that are all legal, but kind of shady or maybe icky, or whatever the word is, but, limiting access so that they can't copy it, all that type of stuff. They have a monopoly on that drug for the foreseeable future. So they have a couple different launches that are going on. The other side of that, they are providing better access to patients. They're going out and actually finding patients now. They're helping patients with their copay. They're putting the burden on the insurance, not the patient. So in a lot of ways, that's a drug that, they have a portfolio of drugs that for 60 years, 20 years, 10 years, maybe were being served. They were underserving their populations and nobody was thinking about how to make them better. That's definitely now going on. It's just costing, let's say, the U.S. healthcare system a couple tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
So that's that kind of question, though. So you look at a company like RTRX, management's done a great job of, finding value. We don't need to get into it all, but look at the voucher they got from the FDA and what they sold it for. Look at the revenue ramp that they've had. And fundamentally, they have 2 really interesting pipeline assets, I would say, that that people should start to get interested in and excited in. I think that they also had a problem with, headline risk around their CEO, Martin Shkreli, when he left. I think that they had a lot of projects. He was trying to do too much. I mean, you see that happening again, where he just became CEO of CBIO, Calabio, and he's also CEO of Turing, and he's buying assets into both. And there's a lot going on for a single management team. But RTRX has done a good job, I think, rationalizing their current portfolio and drug assets, in 2015. And, that stock is one that was in the 30s before, and now it's around 20. And I think that's all from the headline risk that we've seen over the last year.
You think everything these last couple of quarters has been?
Yeah, I think they're fundamentally executing.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Shkreli. We were talking on the train the other night about this, and it's an interesting story. So, legal stuff tied up in this, all of the drug pricing stuff. What's the most interesting part about this guy, and what does he mean in a more broad sense to the industry? Like, what does he represent here?
I think he represents the person who's unabashed about what the system is, right? Like, I do think he honestly, for everything, all of the interviews I've seen and all the things I've followed online about him, like, I think he cares about patient outcomes. I think he wants new medicines. I think he prides himself on bringing interesting things either into the marketplace or whatever, right? Like, creating shareholder value in a way that serves patients, I think would be a true statement for him, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, he's doing it in the way that our really messed up system has said it's okay to do things, right? So you have all these compromises, all these weird exclusions, all these like incentives and carrots and things. And he's a really smart guy who says, okay, well, this is the world. I'm going to operate in it. I'm going to do a great job. And I'm not going to be apologetic about it. He's on TV last week saying to the Forbes guys, I could get sued if I don't do these things because I have a fiduciary responsibility. And people are like, what are you talking? Like, that's like,
well, look,
you do though. You are.
Most of these writers don't, like, they think fiduciary responsibility is something that exists in theory but doesn't really happen.
And you could argue that pharmaceutical companies are incredibly irresponsible in that respect because
Absolutely.
they don't price things higher.
Yeah.
Because you have a system with no counterbalance to pricing. Yeah. And it's like this weird, like, everybody's looking at each other until somebody blinks on when are we going to actually have to tackle this problem. Now, if you don't believe the government has the staying power and the ability to like constructively do that, you should just keep pushing prices. I mean, like, I asked Dendreon when they came out with their Provence drug in 2009 or 10 or whatever it was, and everybody was upset that it was $100,000. And all they could say to me, or $91,000, all they could say to me was like, no, there's nothing legally anyone can do. And I said to them, well, then why is it so cheap? And they couldn't believe I said that, but there's no answer, right? Like, it could have been $1 million a patient. Now, margin-wise, their margin was actually way below normal. It's like 30% cost of goods sold. That's unheard of for pharma.
Yeah.
So why don't you charge $1 million and do really good like financing stuff for the doctors? I don't know. So Martin Shkreli is the guy who's actually doing it all, right? And for better or worse, and he's not really even going out of line. Like, he still probably is in line with the comps for these drugs, or at least with the outcomes that these drugs provide, right? So if you have a 30-day set of pills that you can take and it saves a life for an HIV patient, other drugs that save lives get like $200,000 to $400,000 a year. And nobody says that's crazy. I mean, they say it's crazy, but nobody's saying like, don't do that. And so he took a drug that we were getting, used to $1,200 a year for a cure, or $1,200 one time for a cure. And everyone's freaking out when he made it $75,000. But that's just the system. Right? So I think that the bigger thing that what we're seeing is like somebody who's actually acting out all the rules that have been created in this perverted, compromised, messed up system. Right. And so the question is, does anybody have the ability, or does any group of people have the ability to really rewrite the rules? And until then, I don't think that these things are going to happen. Now, he might end up being the one who pushes them over the edge. But if you also you see a couple really big breakthroughs out of one of these companies, you see this cancer drug that he got from CBIO.
If he didn't,
if you want to say, oh, maybe it's good to
charge that money, maybe,
because he's the example that is putting a lot of the money back into R&D. Right. He is spending it on new pipeline assets, and you look at a Valiant, which is much more of like the distribution model. They're not interested in that, which is fine. I think from a shareholder standpoint, it's good to have that type of product, investable asset. But he's going to be a lot trickier to say no to if RE024 starts curing kids that couldn't walk. Like, that's a lot tougher, right? Right. Interesting. So I think that he's going to create a lot of buying opportunities, really. Because he's going to do these stupid things. He's going to do not stupid, but these headline destructive and value things. And somebody who understands it, you're going to look at it and say, like, wait a second, like, this isn't going to actually be a bad thing. So as a trader, as a buyer, you can like get these names that you like and you're interested in, and we see them go down because of like people don't really understand what's going on. You know, I think that's a great buy opportunity. Like a good example is that this company Acorn, they use specialty distribution. They're a generic drug maker. They use special distribution channels. When Valiant was getting destroyed because of Phylodor and all those types of headlines, they were down enormous. But they're the opposite almost. Like they're generic drugs at really low prices. So the fact that they were down on drug pricing risk made no sense. If you're aware of that, the stock's up 60% off the lows in the last 6 weeks because people say like, oh my God.
So you think this is one of those names that just got taken down?
Oh, 100%. People just didn't get it. And like, I don't know if it's, you know, a correlation algorithm somewhere or a ticker tag or whatever it is, but like there's somebody out there saying like, oh, these are the same, and they're not the same.
Yeah,
so if you're a trader looking at that, these things are like heaven.
I mean, I asked you this once. How many people are actually trading biotech names in size that know what they're doing?
That's a tough question. There's like a cult of people that I used to know that we would see. You see everybody at the exact same comments. Listen, there's a lot of buying power. There's billions.
Yeah, but the raw number. So what I'm trying to get at is how many people are there?
You know, I'm going to say a number that's totally wrong because, like, in my mind, it's like 20, but I'm sure it's actually.
You say it's like a couple dozen.
I'm going to say it's probably like 200. Though.
Okay,
I don't know though.
All right, even if it's 200 people, right? 200 people are going to misprice stuff a lot easier than 50,000 people are going to misprice stuff. How many people do you think are trading Caterpillar? How many people do you think are trading GE or Bank of America or even Under Armour? Right?
I think that there is a difference there because the market caps are smaller, right? So you can see like an $800 million market cap.
So what I'm getting at is on an individual basis, there are 20,000 professionals trading Under Armour, right? And every day they're looking at the fundamentals and the expected fundamentals and the industry fundamentals and the multiples for other companies in that industry, and they're trading based on that, right? And there's 20,000 or whatever it is. And what I get the feeling of with this industry in general is that there's 200 people who actually know what they're doing, and there's a lot of other people who are buying and selling ETFs, right? And that's why the correlation between an Acorn and a Valiant is so high when it shouldn't be. And there's so much especially in outcomes. There's got to be so much dispersion in outcomes amongst biotechs in terms of the fundamentals. Is this drug going to make it? How much is it going to sell? What is the percentage chance that it gets through trials? All of these things. But yet you throw them in IBB and now the correlation is 60% just to IBB when it shouldn't be.
And you also see a huge correlation, I think, with just beta in general in the market because they're all high leverage, right? So it's, I gotta sell this biotech, and it's like, well, nothing has changed. Like, it's amazing that this is a $50 DCF every day for the last 6 months, and like it's gone from 70 to 30 all on headline and market moves. So, yeah, I agree, but I also think that it's probably a little bit over. I mean, it's a really complicated industry. So and I don't want to downplay that Caterpillar isn't, but when you look at like the regulatory nuances and how just stark the difference is, like it's a zero. Oh, it's $1 billion drug. Yeah. It's a this, it's a that. Like it's really, really levered to detail in a way that a lot of other industries.
Which is why I
think it's a great thing to trade and study.
Yes, which is why I've always thought that Slingshot was a great idea. Mostly because if you could become one of those people who's actually educated about what's going on, unlike another industry which is so widely followed, you can actually have a significant edge just by being one of those 200, 300, 400 people, right? And
it's very tangibly changed in the last 10 years. I started in 2008, and I heard stories that there were 18 months all the time. Like 2006, 2007, you could see information on websites that meant the stock was going to go down 90%. Like, not even a debate. It's not like, I think it's like, no, this is when this gets out, it's gonna be down 90%. It'd be 3 days. Yeah, the stock wouldn't move. And I heard a story about a drug that went generic. It was like 90% of the company's revenue. They're no longer a public company anymore. They got bought by somebody. This is like 2006. And for 3 days, the stock didn't go down, even though their entire revenue base was eviscerated on a surprise, basically. And people I know were like calling everyone on the street for 2 days, shorting every share. Like, please, I don't care what the bar was, just give me more shares. and they made their whole year in that day. But now, not insider trading, not anything. It was a federal government website just put it out there, and nobody cared because that drug went generic. And so that world doesn't exist anymore. Like people get it. Like people know that this drug.
Quants are now scraping every website on earth to get all that data.
Well, I don't know if the quants are those people who are moving, but yeah. But I still think that the more complicated you can make a sector, the more investable it is.
Right.
As weird as that sounds.
So there were some other names that you wanted to talk about that were specific to a conference, I think it was.
Yeah, so I mean, to go back to our company, Slingshot, we've been working for a pretty long time now on launching a whole new enterprise level, like customer facing version of our company. Totally new interface. I don't know if anybody listening had signed up for the beta version, but that was put together on a shoestring. And so we spent a long time, and really, there's a interesting healthcare conference, ASH, right now going on in Orlando, and it's a lot of cancer companies. There's some sickle cell stuff, but it's mostly a lot of the new exciting CAR T therapy companies and stuff are all presenting data down there, and so it's just a ton of information that comes out. There's abstracts that come out, and then new data sets and companies spinning it, and there's just a wealth of stuff that's come out over the last 3 days now. And so we're going to host a call next week with one of the leading immuno-oncology experts out there. Come to the site and find out who it is. And it's going to be sponsored by someone who's really well known in Twitter for coverage of immuno-oncology stocks. It's going to be free to anyone who wants to come look at it. And so we're going to go through what was exciting, what wasn't exciting, who disappointed. Like Bluebird, their sickle cell data was a little
pull up a
disappointing
couple
today.
of these. Let's pull up a couple of these names here.
Yeah. Their data was a little bit disappointing today, and I think there'll be a big battle around how that plays out going forward. It's down like 40% today. Some other drugs totally flopped. I think like you see like Juno and stuff maybe was a little better. And so it's an exciting conference, and so for our customers and our members and anybody listening who'd like to be part of it, we'll walk through with someone who's one of the preeminent people in the field who's at the conference presenting and all that type of stuff. What was good, what was bad. Like, let's get in the weeds, let's understand really, which managements are maybe really in a tough spot now, and which ones, maybe aren't getting the benefit of the doubt that they should. I think those are the interesting places when, the market has an expectation. They really want to see a headline, and then it's not quite that good, but it's not that it's like a zero. And so they huge overreaction sometimes. So those types of things, I think, are places you can really get exciting insights. And, at the end of the call, everybody can make up their own mind what they think, but I think you'll have a lot of really just raw, like, I can't argue with this now. Like, this guy really made a lot of points because he spent so much time on it.
Awesome.
So that'll be an exciting thing for us next week to kind of debut the power of this type of conversation to people.
That's great. So we'll cut it there. Definitely go and check out the stuff on Slingshot Insights. That should be a pretty good investor call. And we'll have you back sometime next quarter to talk in the middle as we kind of really get into the heavy part of the earnings season. Wanted to give everybody kind of a forward look at some of the different themes in the industry right now instead of the specific earnings announcements, which we're still 2 months away from.
Yeah. And the beauty of the site going forward is that any of the stocks that you guys are interested in, any of the data that comes out, patent stuff, all that type of, it doesn't need to be healthcare, but that's where we're really focusing. You guys can propose the projects to us, and we can get the experts on the phone. So, is this sexual health drug interesting or no? All that type of stuff. So we'll get those conversations going, and hopefully help you guys make some money.
We actually have some plans for that we've been talking with some sell side groups about the deeper data around drug expectations and all the things that you use to model out and want kind of expectations data for. We're starting to talk about kind of those deeper level statistics around and expectations data sets around each drug, each company, all of those things. So I'm really excited about that. It's it's something that we're thinking about obviously for later on in 2016 or 2017, but some significant things that we're discussing now that kind of fit into what you guys do. So
yeah, I mean, and our goal is to be the engine that the source that lets you guys make good estimates on that, right? So what's peak sales, what's ramp look like, what's the probability it gets approved? So there's just so many investable events in the space. It's really an interesting way to try and make money.
Awesome. Well, get on to Slingshot Insights, make your estimates for the biotech sector, pharma sector for next season on Estimize, and we will see you guys next week. Have a good one.